The sea is restless tonight. Waves crash against the steel hulls of trawlers in the North Sea, concealing beneath their churning depths a forgotten landscape, a world swallowed by water thousands of years ago. Fishermen speak of nets snagging on strange shapes buried in the silt, antlers of giant elk, tools carved from stone, even fragments of what seem to be dwellings. To most, these are curiosities of nature. But to a growing number of scientists and seekers, they are whispers of a vanished land, Doggerland. Imagine a place once stretching from the white cliffs of Britain to the sandy dunes of Denmark, where rivers meandered across fertile plains and mammoths grazed in the open fields. This was not some distant, alien world, it was Europe, as it stood just 12,000 years ago. And then, almost overnight in geological terms, it was gone. Swallowed by the rising seas of the melting ice age. The textbooks tell us Doggerland was nothing more than a marshy hunting ground for Stone Age tribes. A temporary waypoint in humanity's long journey. But what if that isn't the full story? What if this land, bigger than many modern nations, was home to more than hunters and gatherers? What if its memory has been deliberately erased, leaving us only fragments to piece together in the dark? Sonar scans reveal ghostly traces of rivers and valleys still etched beneath the waves. Divers report structures that shouldn't exist. Myths from surrounding cultures speak of drowned kingdoms and catastrophic floods. Tonight, we descend into this mystery. Was Doggerland just a plain lost to nature's fury, or the cradle of a forgotten civilization? The answers may lie beneath the restless waters, waiting to resurface. At the end of the last ice age, the world stood at a turning point. The great ice sheets that had once smothered much of northern Europe were retreating, melting into roaring rivers and swelling seas. What they left behind was neither barren wasteland nor empty plain, but a vast, fertile stretch of land now lost to the ocean's depths. Archaeologists call it Doggerland, a drowned continent, a forgotten Eden that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. Imagine it, a place of winding rivers, glistening marshes, and rolling grasslands, alive with the thunder of wild herds and the cries of migrating birds. This was Europe before Europe. Not the fragmented patchwork of islands and coastlines we know today, but a single, unified world of abundance. Forests of oak, hazel, and birch spread across the horizon, their roots gripping soil nourished by centuries of glacial retreat. Salmon surged through clear rivers, while aurochs and red deer grazed in open meadows. Woolly mammoths and rhinoceroses still roamed the northern edges, relics of a colder age lingering at the margins of a warming climate. To the people who lived here, Doggerland was more than survival, it was opportunity. Archaeology paints them as simple hunter-gatherers, bands moving restlessly with the seasons. Yet fragments pulled from beneath the sea tell a richer story. Microlith tools, carefully worked bone harpoons, and evidence of woven fishing nets suggest not a desperate struggle against nature, but a community thriving in rhythm with it. Some scientists even argue that these people were innovators, developing new ways to hunt, fish, and build long before written history began. And Doggerland was no isolated backwater. Its rivers and valleys formed natural highways, drawing groups together across hundreds of miles. It was here, perhaps, that stories and skills spread between distant tribes. Trade may have flowed as easily as the waters themselves, amber from the Baltic, flint from chalk cliffs, seashell ornaments carried inland. These were not just trinkets of survival, but symbols of connection, hints of culture, ritual, and shared belief. But science often speaks with caution. To many archaeologists, Doggerland is simply a lost land bridge, a corridor walked by animals and people migrating to new frontiers. Yet the sheer scale of it, the richness of its ecosystem, the density of finds recovered from fishing trawlers, suggests something more. Could this drowned plain have been a true heartland of prehistoric Europe, a cultural center that bound together the ancestors of nations yet unborn? Myth and memory echo faintly here, too. Across Europe, legends of lands swallowed by the sea, Atlantis, Lyonesse, Cantor Guelad, persist like whispers of truth wrapped in folklore. Were these tales born from cultural memory, stories passed down through generations about a real place lost to rising tides? Or are we imposing myth upon science, desperate to give a drowned landscape a narrative it never had? Either way, the vision is haunting, thousands of square miles of rivers, forests, and settlements, erased not by war or famine, but by the slow, unstoppable rise of the sea. A reminder that civilizations, however small or mighty, stand only as long as nature allows. As the waters crept higher, Doggerland's fate was sealed. Families, hunters, storytellers, and builders would one day watch their world shrink, fields turn to marsh, and homes vanish under salt water. Yet before that ending came, Doggerland stood as Europe's forgotten foundation, a place where people and nature flourished together at the dawn of our shared history. And so, the question lingers, was Doggerland merely a passage between lands, or was it itself a cradle of culture, an ancient Europe before Europe? For centuries, the North Sea was thought of as nothing more than an endless expanse of water, a grey, restless barrier between Britain and mainland Europe. But in the early 20th century, fishermen began to pull up things that did not belong to the sea. From the depths of their heavy trawl nets came enormous mammoth bones, antlers as wide as a man's arms, and sharpened flint tools that could only have been crafted by human hands. These strange finds hinted at a forgotten chapter of history, one buried far beneath the waves. What was once dismissed as chance debris soon grew into a mystery too large to ignore. By the mid-20th century, the puzzle pieces became undeniable. Each discovery suggested that where the sea now stretched, there had once been rolling plains, dense forests, and river valleys teeming with life. It wasn't just a handful of artifacts, it was evidence of an entire lost world. Yet no one knew how vast it had been, nor what secrets it still concealed. The breakthrough came in the 1990s, when technology gave researchers new eyes to peer beneath the water. Using sonar mapping, tools designed originally for oil and gas exploration, scientists began to trace the hidden contours of the seabed. What they found was staggering: submerged hills, winding river channels, and ancient coastlines lying silent below the waves. It was as if the ocean had preserved the ghostly outline of a vanished country. By the early 2000s, more detailed surveys revealed the true scale of this drowned land. Doggerland, as it came to be known, had once stretched from Britain all the way to the Netherlands, Denmark, and Germany, a vast plain connecting Europe into a single, sweeping landscape. Researchers described it as the real heart of Europe, a land that had supported human hunters, gatherers, and entire ecosystems now lost to memory. But the revelations did not stop there. Excavations and dredging efforts uncovered haunting reminders of the people who once lived there. Fragments of human remains surfaced alongside carved tools, suggesting that communities had thrived, hunted, and built their lives on this land before the sea swallowed it. Even more eerie were the buried forests, ancient tree stumps still rooted in place, preserved under layers of sand and silt, whispering of a time when this was not seabed, but woodland. The image that emerged was both breathtaking and unsettling, a lost world lying just out of sight, concealed beneath the churning waters of the North Sea. A world where mammoths once roamed, rivers meandered across fertile plains, and early humans carved out their existence on ground that today lies more than 100 feet underwater. And with every discovery, a larger question began to surface: if Doggerland could vanish so completely, what other forgotten worlds might still rest beneath our oceans, waiting to be uncovered? Imagine for a moment a coastline where the sea is not a barrier but a neighbor, where families built homes on fertile plains, where rivers wound through green valleys, and where ancient hunters tracked deer across grasslands that now lie silent beneath the waves. That world, known to scientists as Doggerland, was swallowed by the sea thousands of years ago. But here's the question that keeps historians, archaeologists, and mythologists awake at night: did its memory survive, not in maps or ruins, but in the stories whispered through generations? Across Europe, myths of drowned lands ripple through folklore like haunting echoes. Take the Celtic tale of Ys. In this Breton legend, Ys was a magnificent city, glittering with wealth, protected by dikes against the sea. But hubris, sin, or betrayal, depending on the storyteller, led to its destruction. The ocean poured in, and YS vanished beneath the waves, leaving only church bells tolling faintly from the depths on stormy nights. Sail a little further north and you'll encounter Cantor Arguelid, a Welsh myth of a sunken kingdom off the coast of Cardigan Bay. Its people, too, depended on sea walls, and when negligence, or divine judgment, caused the floodgates to fail, the land drowned. Some Welsh fishermen still claim that, on quiet days, they can hear bells ringing from beneath the water. Coincidence? Or cultural memory of a flood too immense to forget? And then there's the Frisian legend of Atland, recorded in a controversial manuscript called the Ora Linda Book. Atland, sometimes called Old Land, was said to have been destroyed by rising seas around 2193 BC. To many scholars, the manuscript is a forgery. Yet the persistence of a sunken homeland in Frisian lore is striking, especially when set alongside Breton and Welsh traditions. Of course, looming over all of this is the most famous drowned world of all, Atlantis. First described by Plato, Atlantis was said to be a mighty island nation swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. Historians insist that Plato was crafting allegory, a moral tale about hubris. But others wonder, was his story rooted in older oral traditions, carried forward from a time when rising seas were not metaphor but terrifying reality? Now, scientists warn us against drawing direct lines between geology and myth. They argue that tales of YS, Cantor Arguelid, and Atlantis are simply products of universal human fears, floods, punishment, and the uncontrollable sea. But here's the tension: the stories are too consistent, too geographically clustered, to dismiss entirely. Why do so many cultures along the North Sea and Atlantic coastlines preserve legends of drowned kingdoms? Why do the details, city walls, bells, fertile plains swallowed by sudden waters, resonate so clearly with what we know of Doggerland's fate? Perhaps the truth lies in the middle ground. These weren't eyewitness reports of Doggerland itself, but rather distorted memories, passed along, reshaped, and mythologized until history blurred into legend. Imagine families displaced by rising waters. Their descendants carry tales of a homeland lost to the sea. Over centuries, memory becomes myth. And by the time these stories reach us, they no longer resemble simple warnings, they become epics of morality, betrayal, and divine justice. But what if they are more than allegory? What if the fairy tales of drowned kingdoms are in fact folk memory of Doggerland's final hours, a prehistoric echo still resonating in our myths today? And if that's true, it raises a chilling question: what else did our ancestors witness that we've dismissed as mere legend? They say the sea remembers everything. But in the case of Doggerland, it remembers too much, and it remembers in silence. For thousands of years, this lost world had been a thriving land bridge between Britain and mainland Europe. Families built homes on its grassy plains, hunters followed reindeer across open meadows, and rivers carved fertile paths through forests teeming with life. It was, in every sense, a cradle of early civilization. But then, slowly, the tide began to change. As the Ice Age waned, glaciers melted, and the oceans crept forward inch by inch. Each passing century, villages found their boundaries shifting. What was once fertile hunting ground became marsh. What was once marsh gave way to shallow pools. Families, generation after generation, were forced to move their homes a little higher, a little further inland. To the people of Doggerland, the sea must have seemed like a patient predator, moving quietly, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, that moment came. Around 6100 BC, the earth itself trembled. Off the coast of Norway, a section of the continental shelf collapsed in what scientists call the Storegga Slide, one of the largest underwater landslides in human history. The result was a monstrous tsunami. Imagine it, a wall of water, surging with unimaginable force, racing across the North Sea. In a matter of hours, entire landscapes were erased. Villages vanished without a trace. Families who had lived on those plains for generations found themselves caught between a sky gone black with storm and an ocean that had risen like a living beast. Archaeologists tell us this was the final blow, the moment Doggerland ceased to exist. To them, it was a natural disaster, a geological inevitability brought on by the shifting earth. But for those who lived it, it must have felt like something far greater, something mythic. Was it punishment from the gods? A curse from the deep? Legends across Europe whisper of great floods that erased ancient peoples, the Mesopotamian deluge, the biblical Noah, the Norse tales of a drowning world. Could Doggerland be the memory beneath them all? Some researchers suggest that the survivors of Doggerland fled west and south, carrying with them knowledge, stories, and perhaps even the seeds of Europe's earliest farming cultures. If true, then the drowning of Doggerland wasn't just an end, it was a beginning. Out of tragedy, new societies may have been born. Still, the sea keeps its secrets. Beneath the cold waters of the North Sea lie the ghostly outlines of rivers, forests, and perhaps even settlements that once thrived. The silence of those depths is a reminder, whole worlds can vanish, and all we are left with are fragments, bones dredged by trawlers, shards of tools caught in fishing nets, whispers of a land that should never have been forgotten. Doggerland's drowning is more than history. It is a warning. For if the ocean could swallow a continent once, what else might it take again? They call it Europe's Atlantis, a land swallowed by the sea, leaving only scattered traces in the nets of fishermen and the archives of archaeologists. Over the decades, dredgers working the North Sea have hauled up curious objects, harpoons carved from reindeer antler, delicate microlith blades, fragments of human skulls darkened by centuries beneath the waves. Each artifact is a ghostly reminder that Doggerland was not an empty wasteland, but a place where people lived, hunted, and remembered. Among the most striking discoveries are peat samples lifted from the seabed. Within them lie preserved seeds, roots, and pollen that whisper of an ancient environment, lush marshlands, thick forests, and fertile plains. Scientists can reconstruct the seasonal cycles of this vanished world, wild cattle grazing on grasslands, red deer roaming through oak groves, and people fashioning tools as rivers meandered across their villages. The story sounds almost idyllic, until we notice what is missing. For all the scientific attention poured into other prehistoric sites, Doggerland has received surprisingly little excavation. Vast sums are spent mapping shipwrecks, drilling for oil, and charting submarine cables, yet systematic digs across this drowned landscape remain rare. Why? Official explanations point to logistical challenges: the seabed is difficult to access, currents are dangerous, visibility poor. But skeptics argue something deeper may be at play. If Doggerland truly held complex settlements, ritual structures, or early engineering feats, would it not threaten the neat timeline of Europe's gradual civilization? Mainstream archaeology often paints the Mesolithic peoples of Doggerland as scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, little more than nomads clinging to survival. But the evidence doesn't fully align. Why would skull fragments appear in clusters, hinting at burials? Why do certain tool caches suggest deliberate storage, rather than accidental loss? Even the pollen records hint at human intervention: clearings in forests, signs of controlled burning, the fingerprints of a people shaping their land. It's as if we are staring at a puzzle where half the pieces have been quietly set aside. Some researchers argue this is no accident. By maintaining the image of Doggerland as a peripheral backwater, archaeology avoids uncomfortable questions: could Northern Europe have hosted advanced communities long before Stonehenge? Could the roots of ritual, trade, and early society stretch into the depths of the North Sea? And so, the story of Doggerland teeters between science and silence. On one side, harpoons, seeds, bones, real, tangible data. On the other, the absence of excavation, the unwillingness to dig too deeply. Perhaps what lies beneath is not just peat and silt, but knowledge that could rewrite history. As we peer into these fragments, the mystery only deepens. What else remains buried beneath the waves, waiting to surface in a fisherman's net, or in a story the establishment prefers not to tell? For a civilization that existed beneath what is now the North Sea, Doggerland seems almost eerily absent from our collective memory. Despite mounting archaeological evidence, it rarely finds a place in mainstream historical education, as if a silent agreement exists to leave it unmentioned. Why has this ancient land, which once connected Britain to continental Europe and nurtured thriving communities, faded into obscurity? Scholars suggest a complex web of academic caution, political sensitivity, and cultural bias may be at play, a subtle but persistent gatekeeping that shapes the stories we are allowed to inherit. Consider the reluctance to acknowledge advanced prehistoric Europeans. Excavations across Doggerland have revealed evidence of sophisticated hunting strategies, extensive trade networks, and intricate toolmaking. Yet, these findings often struggle to gain traction in academic discourse. Could it be that our traditional narrative of European history, centered on the rise of classical civilizations like Greece and Rome, leaves little room for a submerged society that challenges the linear progression of human development? The implications are profound. Admitting the existence of a complex prehistoric Europe forces historians to reconsider assumptions about migration, innovation, and the very foundations of our cultural identity. National pride and politics add another layer to this story. Britain, geographically isolated once Doggerland sank beneath rising seas, has constructed a historical narrative that emphasizes insular achievements rather than connections with continental neighbors. Conversely, European countries with vestiges of the submerged land often face the temptation to downplay Doggerland to avoid rewriting the continuity of their ancient lineages. In both cases, the politics of identity shape the silence, rendering Doggerland a ghost in the archives rather than a celebrated chapter in history. Even more intriguing are the anomalous artifacts and controversial bones that hint at knowledge lost or intentionally obscured. Items dredged from the North Sea floor defy simple categorization, tools far ahead of their supposed era, skeletal remains suggesting migration patterns unaligned with conventional models, and fragments that hint at ritual or artistic practices yet to be fully understood. Many of these finds languish in forgotten corners of museums or are dismissed as inconclusive, yet they collectively paint a picture that challenges accepted chronology. The pattern emerges: whenever discoveries threaten to disrupt the tidy timeline of human history, they are quietly shelved, delayed, or reframed, leaving an unsettling gap in our understanding. Doggerland's story is not one of conspiracy or hysteria, but of persistent, almost invisible suppression. It demonstrates how the weight of tradition, politics, and academic caution can create blind spots in our knowledge, leaving entire civilizations stranded in obscurity. The submerged plains of Doggerland whisper a lesson: history is not merely a record of what happened but also a reflection of what we allow ourselves to see. By piecing together the fragments, by questioning the silences, we begin to glimpse a past more complex, more interconnected, and more enigmatic than textbooks would have us believe. The vast, sunken plains of Doggerland were not empty wastelands, as once imagined. Beneath the North Sea's waves, evidence whispers of a thriving human presence, an intricate tapestry of life that stretched across what is now Europe's watery graveyard. These were not mere wandering foragers scouring the land for survival. Archaeological traces suggest a society aware of its environment, adept at fishing, hunting, and possibly even rudimentary farming. Flint tools and animal bones tell of daily struggle and ingenuity, but it is the subtle signs of social complexity that ignite the imagination: structured settlements, hearths clustered in patterns hinting at communal life, and artifacts that suggest shared belief systems. Genetic studies add another layer to this story, connecting Doggerland's inhabitants to modern Europeans. DNA extracted from coastal remains reveals that these people were ancestors of the populations that would eventually populate Britain, Scandinavia, and parts of continental Europe. Yet, these strands of ancestry are not simply markers of survival, they hint at a population capable of adaptation and cultural exchange. Some researchers propose that as the rising seas swallowed Doggerland, refugees may have carried knowledge, tools, and traditions across the continent, influencing the very foundations of European civilization. Mainstream anthropology often paints Doggerlanders as simple foragers, surviving one season at a time. But alternative theories invite us to imagine something far more remarkable: proto-agricultural practices taking root along fertile plains, early seafaring vessels navigating shallow waters, and perhaps even the earliest stirrings of monumental culture. Could these people, displaced by rising tides, have carried seeds of knowledge that would later manifest in megalithic structures like Stonehenge? Some scholars cautiously entertain the idea, while skeptics remain, pointing out the lack of direct evidence. Yet the mystery persists, teasing us with possibilities. Artifacts recovered from submerged landscapes suggest trade, communication, and shared symbolism, hinting that Doggerland was not an isolated backwater but part of a broader network of cultural interaction. Shell ornaments, carved bones, and patterns in toolmaking hint at aesthetic sensibilities and rituals, perhaps even storytelling or proto-religious practices. These fragments allow us to glimpse a world where human creativity and resilience met the raw forces of nature, a civilization slowly erased by the sea but never completely forgotten. As Doggerland disappeared beneath the waves, it carried its people to new lands, leaving behind a puzzle that modern science and archaeology are only beginning to piece together. The legacy of its inhabitants challenges our assumptions about prehistoric Europe. They were not just survivors of a drowned land, they may have been pioneers of ideas, movement, and innovation, an enigmatic population whose echoes shaped the course of history in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. Long before modern Europe rose from its primordial swamps, there was Doggerland, a vast, fertile expanse where forests whispered in the wind and rivers carved through rolling plains. Today, it lies silent beneath the North Sea, a sunken memory of a world that once was. Yet, the echoes of Doggerland are far from gone. They persist, hidden in the myths, place names, and even the DNA of the people who followed in its wake. Could this lost land have shaped Europe's collective memory more profoundly than we dare to imagine? Across northern Europe, countless legends tell of great floods that swallowed entire landscapes. From the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the Native American tales of watery cataclysms, these stories share a haunting similarity, a warning etched into human memory. Some scholars dismiss these as coincidence or symbolic morality tales, but what if they are fragments of a shared experience, distorted through millennia? Doggerland's slow submergence, beginning around 12,000 years ago and accelerating catastrophically during the Storegga slide, could have left such an imprint, preserved in oral histories that evolved into the myths we know today. Even the map of modern Europe carries subtle fingerprints of Doggerland's existence. Many place names along the North Sea coast hint at lost landscapes, linguistic echoes of shores and rivers that vanished beneath the waves. Archaeologists have uncovered submerged artifacts, stone tools, traces of settlements, suggesting that humans lived, worked, and thrived here. These remnants challenge the neat narratives of post-Ice Age Europe. Each discovery raises questions: who were these people, and how did their disappearance ripple through neighboring populations? How much of our cultural memory, encoded in story and song, originates from a land no longer visible, yet never entirely forgotten? Genetics offers another layer of intrigue. DNA studies show surprising continuities among northern European populations, hinting at migrations and intermingling that may have been driven by the slow drowning of Doggerland. The survivors carried fragments of their homeland, not just in memory, but in their very bodies, migrating inland, blending with new communities, and seeding the ancestry of modern Europeans. In this sense, Doggerland never truly vanished, it lives on in us, shaping not only the land we inhabit but the people we have become. And then there is the tantalizing possibility that Doggerland inspired stories of Atlantis, passed down and transformed over centuries. Plato's account, dismissed by some as purely allegorical, describes a thriving civilization swallowed by the sea, a mirror of Doggerland's own fate. While skeptics urge caution, the parallels are impossible to ignore: fertile plains, advanced hunter-gatherer societies, and an inexorable flood that reshaped the world. The boundary between myth and memory blurs, leaving us to wonder whether the echoes of Doggerland are still whispering beneath the waves, waiting for those willing to listen. Doggerland's story reminds us that history is never truly lost. It lingers, subtle yet persistent, in the myths we tell, the names we speak, and the bloodlines we inherit. Even as modern Europe stretches its cities toward the horizon, the drowned plains beneath the North Sea remain a silent testament to a world that shaped human imagination long before we could write it down. The land may be gone, but its legacy resonates, across time, across cultures, and within us all. Beneath the restless waves of the North Sea lies a memory almost too vast to comprehend, a drowned landscape, a vanished world, and perhaps, the cradle of Europe's earliest civilization. Doggerland is more than a geographical footnote, it is a haunting testament to time's relentless march, a place where science struggles to illuminate and myth reaches for the impossible. Every sonar ping that echoes across its sunken valleys carries both knowledge and the promise of secrets we may not yet be ready to confront. Archaeologists have painstakingly pieced together the contours of this lost land, rolling hills, rivers cutting through fertile plains, and evidence that humans once thrived here, hunting, gathering, and building lives that were abruptly swept away by rising seas. Yet, for every discovery, there is a question that refuses to settle: what did these people believe? What stories, what rituals, what civilizations might have blossomed here, erased not by conquest or fire, but by the quiet, unstoppable hunger of the ocean? Science offers answers, yet it also highlights the gaps. Sediment cores, submerged forests, and fossilized bones speak in hushed tones of life interrupted. Meanwhile, legends whisper of a paradise beneath the waves, a lost world that survives only in memory, myth, and tantalizing fragments. The contrast between hard evidence and the allure of the forbidden knowledge, the stories we are not told, or perhaps are forbidden to imagine, creates a tension that lingers long after the maps are closed and the microscopes are powered down. Divers still stumble upon human bones, tusks of mammoths, and shards of stone tools, relics that anchor the imagination to reality. Sonar scans reveal valleys and hills that mirror the landscapes of today, yet are drenched in centuries of silence. Storms churn the sea, sometimes exposing new clues, sometimes swallowing them again before they can be studied. Each wave seems to whisper, "This is not the end." The story is still here, just out of reach. And yet, Doggerland is more than a story of loss. It is a mirror reflecting our own relationship with the past, the civilizations we celebrate, the histories we neglect, and the truths we fear might complicate the neat narrative of human progress. If this land truly hosted Europe's first communities, then beneath the seas may lie the remnants of knowledge, artistry, and culture older than we can imagine. Forgotten cities, tools, and bones, silent witnesses to lives once lived, may still wait to challenge everything we think we know about ourselves. History prefers memory to be tidy, yet the ocean remembers otherwise. Doggerland persists as a reminder that beneath our feet, and beneath our seas, the past is never truly gone. It waits, patient and watchful, for those willing to listen, to dive, to uncover. And for every storm that rages, for every sonar echo that scans the depths, the question remains: what else lies waiting beneath the waves, and why have we been taught to forget? The sea holds its secrets, and perhaps that is the true mystery.